the Phillies, who had just a brutal weekend and a brutal day yesterday. Frank Klose was in St. Petersburg for the Phillies and Rays series, and obviously that game yesterday just completely got out of hand. This is a season getting out of hand. We bring Frank into the conversation. His mailbag has been extra active the last couple of weeks with people who are not happy with the direction of this franchise, Frank. It feels like this season is quickly kind of unraveling here. Do you agree?
I don't know if I want to totally go unraveling at this point, but it's clearly not where they want it to be, and this is they need to be better. I think that comes down to it. But there's just a certain sense of hopelessness with this Phillies team that I just can't totally explain it. And if you look at the many questions we've got, most of them are negative, talking about trading people away, rebuilding. Like the mind of the fan is that this team is just not going to be able to work.
I wouldn't disagree with them. I think it's much like the former Sixer variations. They had talent, but poorly constructed together. Like Josh Richardson's a good player. Al Horford's a nice player, but when you put them on the full court with Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, they're not as good. I feel the Phillies are in a similar. They got some players who are okay that are good players, but you can't have Alec Boehm and Rhys Hoskins in your infield. They're both below average. Right now, McCutchen is not a good outfielder. Harper is just a good outfielder. He's not great. Center field, you have a weak outfielder. So I feel like the roster configuration is also a problem here.
Especially it gets exposed when you see some of the regulars get injured, right? I tweeted this during yesterday's game. Like Brad Miller should not be an outfielder. Brad Miller never really was an outfielder.
He shouldn't be an infielder either, Frank.
You have to throw him there out of desperation. And
I
when
get
that
it.
happens,
I get it. He's just not.
Yeah.
I mean, but I said this the other day. I know he's hitting the ball and he's a good hitter. But when you have to hit him third in your lineup, that really shows you where the direction of your franchise is. When you have a journeyman, just an average journeyman, hitting in the middle of your lineup, that kind of shows you the problems you're having.
Yeah, the Phillies did pay him a premium for an extra guy because they felt that they could plug him in when absolutely necessary to some of these spots. But the problem is he's been playing every single day in a starting capacity, out of position, and that's just not what you want out of him. You'd rather see Matt Joyce. Hey, remember Matt Joyce? He was signed to be the left-handed backup outfielder. He's hitting under 100. When Matt Joyce can't hit for you, well, then you got to throw Brad Miller in the outfield. You don't have a good right-handed bat because Scott Kingery couldn't help the Phillies. So they're just a really tough spot where they have to play Brad Miller every single day. He's in key spots in the lineup. And even though he's a productive extra man on most teams, he's way overused.
All right, Frank, a lot of questions this week in the mailbag. And a lot of them, as you mentioned, we're all kind of hinting at, should they bag this season? Is it time to move? I thought this was interesting from Joe. Pull the trigger on trading one of your top two starters for prospects. Should they rebuild? Should they start rebuilding? Hoskins, Boehm. Where do we go from here? So that line of questioning was a very prevalent one in this week's mailbag.
So I spent a lot of time yesterday just kind of breaking down the Phillies and where they're at and what's kind of led to a lot of this. Now, I didn't really get into the pitching. I didn't necessarily get into the defense. However, 4 players make up 37% of this payroll, and that's Bryce Harper, JT Realmuto, Didi Gregorius, and Gene Segura. When they're all playing, they seem to be much, much better. If you look at the records, 10-8 when the 4 of them are all playing in the game. 10-8. That even includes the days that were days off and they came in to pinch hit or whatever else. But if you look at the record otherwise, that's 15-21. So it clearly seems that when those 4 are all in your lineup, you do okay. So I feel like before the Phillies do anything drastic, I mean, luckily there's still some time till the end of July, but when all 4 of them are there, they tend to play much better. If you look at the runs per game, when one of them is missing, one or more of them is missing, it's almost a full run less than when all 4 of them are in your lineup. So what I would say to fans right now is take a deep breath, see where you are in a month. Because if you get Didi back, if you get Bryce Harper back, then your lineup might start functioning better than it should right now. Then you start seeing guys less and less out of position, like Brad Miller we just mentioned, right? And people can find their regular roles. And then maybe, as you mentioned, Andrew McCutchen, maybe that's not so bad, right? Maybe then, Odubel Herrera, he's been decent at the plate as of late. Even if he's not, you can deal with that. So I feel like if you get all four of them in place, you're going to have a much, much different ball club. And I think the Phillies really need to see them all get healthy, see where they're at, and then kind of go from there. Now, there are some big picture questions, like you said, about um, Rhys Hoskins and Alec Boehm. Can they be on the same team? Well, is there going to be a designated hitter next year? I think if that's settled and the answer is yes, well, then maybe you start to formulate how you're going to find a good defensive infielder to join the others. Then if the answer is no, well, then maybe you do have to move on from one of them. And not that, one of the questions was like, well, which one do you get rid of? Well, I don't think it's a matter of getting rid of. I think it's a matter of, can the Phillies just say nobody's untouchable and make the best trade that's going to make the team better at the end of the day? And I think that's how you really have to think about it. They clearly need some young blood in. They clearly need to shore up some of this defense. And those are really big picture questions that really aren't going to be answered within a season. So at this point, I think you need to see what you got, if they're all healthy, and then see how you want to supplement this roster come July if you have an opportunity to do so.
All right, some more questions from this week's mailbag here with Frank Klose, his Phillies mailbag every Tuesday at 97.3ESPN.com. People want to know, what about Nick Maton? Has he essentially been benched?
In a way, yes. I think it kind of snuck up on everybody, or maybe the bigger problems make people not realize it. But Nick Maton has not gotten a hit in his last 10 games in the Phillies. His last hit came on May 18th. But also May 18th, that was the day that Ronald Torreyes came back from his bout with COVID. And Ronald Torreyes has been hot. He's been batting .323 since he came back up from that COVID stint on the IL. So really, Joe Girardi right now, with all the problems that we just mentioned, they need that offense out of the shortstop position if Didi's not there. Luckily, Gene Segura's back, and you don't need to play both of them at the same time. But Ronald Torreyes is producing. He's playing good enough defense. And so you got to ride the hot hand. And unfortunately for Nick Maton, he doesn't really have the opportunity to kind of work through a slump like other players would coming up on the normal timetable. And while Nick Maton was a very, very nice surprise at the beginning of this season and did a really good job for the Phillies just jumping into the major leagues after skipping AAA, at the end of the day, you need to win these ball games. And so for now, Nick Maton is not going to be the one who plays.
Yep. All right. And Torreyes, as you mentioned, he has done pretty well. Defensively, both those guys, as somebody mentioned here in the audio stream, Doug says they are giving up too many extra outs by not playing basic fundamental defense. I think that has been the biggest problem all year. I mean, now you're down in Tampa at that game. How hard is it to see? You're sitting in the crowd there. Like that ball that Boehm just overruns. I mean, is that just because he's a lousy defensive player? Is it legitimately tough to find that ball in the roof in the daytime? They kept saying that on the broadcast about, hey, it's daylight in there. You're sitting in that building. How hard is it to see a ball?
This stadium is my least favorite stadium. It reminds me of a combination of RFK Stadium in Washington, if you've ever been there, and Olympic Stadium in Montreal. When you look up, it's just bright. It's bright white, probably the right color of the baseball, and then there's some catwalks going back and forth around the center. So it's really hard for me to say because of where I was sitting. But looking straight up, I can see how the baseball would sort of blend into the roof, especially the higher it is. And you kind of notice when Boehm misplayed that, he got to the point where the ball seemed to blend in, and then he just kind of misjudged where it was going to go from there. So I kind of understand that could be a challenge. And let's face it, he didn't really play there that much in his career. The end of last season, the Phillies made a stop in St. Pete, but really and of course we know that Boehm has struggled defensively I think someone like Boehm, I think he's let his offensive struggles get into the field. If he's not feeling good about his at-bats, he doesn't feel good about his defense either. And it's a shame the Phillies don't have the opportunity to give him a breather. Maybe when
can't play Brad Miller there.
Yeah, maybe when the Phillies are at full strength with all those four back in the lineup, then maybe you just say Brad Miller, hey, go to third for a couple days, and you say to Boehm,
what about the possibility of moving Hoskins back to left field?
That would be another disaster.
Well, I mean, at least he's played there before, I guess.
Yeah, when Hoskins.
And by the way, it's not like McCutchen has been very good out there either.
Right. I would rather see the Phillies get another outfielder that they could play there.
I'm just saying, if you have Boehm and Hoskins for the rest of this year, if there's no DH and you want to keep those two in, can you do that? I don't know.
I think you got to. I think that's not the type of change you make midseason. I think they need to roll with it for now. Give Bohm some days off. Make sure you have a better guy on the bench that can play some defense late in games when you have a lead. But you got to get those leads first, and I think that the key to that is getting that offense healthy again.
All right, real quick, last one, bullpen related. Remind us again why they kept David Hale over Tony Watson.
Yeah, Tony Watson, most part, been pretty good for the Los Angeles Angels. He just gave up, I think, a 4 spot the other day. His ERA is over 4. But I think that the point here is correct, and it's more about David Hale, right? I think you're going to see some movement there, perhaps. Matt Moore is going to be coming back off the IL. You have Chase Anderson in the bullpen, too. All 3 of them are going to be incredibly redundant if you have 3 long men in your bullpen. And the Phillies have 14 pitchers right now, not because they necessarily needed 14 pitchers, more so that they ran out of possible position players. So when you see that the players get healthy, let's also remember, too, the Phillies already need a 40-man roster spot for Adam Hazley in about 2 weeks. I think he could be the one to go. But you know what? Every time I think he's going to be the one to go, somebody else gets injured or something else happens, and he seems to stick around. But I will say this unequivocally. You can't keep Chase Anderson, Matt Moore, and David Hale all in your bullpen. And I think of the 3, David Hale's making the least amount of money. He's been hit around the hardest. I think he'd be the one to go when they're at full strength and they have all 3 there. But by the way, Ranger Suarez, kudos to him. He kind of came in as a second lefty after Romero's injury. I think Suarez is going to stick around, and that further increases the possibility that David Hale will be gone.
Well, we shall see. As you mentioned, and you wrote another piece over at 97.3 ESPN.com that you guys can go check out, asking, is this just a matter of injury for the Phillies? Are these injuries just kind of, the underlining factor here? I would agree that the injuries to the offensive lineup have been a problem, but those injuries aren't helping them out defensively where they're still struggling. Sadly, Frank, the guy who's produced offensively the most has been Herrera.
Which is very interesting. He looked like after the first week or 10 days that he didn't remember how to hit a Major League Baseball, and kudos to him. I guess he's making contact again, and I mean, let's face it, he needs to produce if he's going to stick around. Now, by the way, Roman Quinn out of the picture now for the rest of the year. At least you know what's going to happen with Roman Quinn. I think him on the bubble was leading to a lot of questions and uncertainty. Hopefully Adam Hazley gets back and you have another option in center field. But
all right. By the way, the lineup is out for tonight. Herrera is leading off. Segura, Hoskins, Realmuto. Miller is in right field. McCutchen is in left. Bohm is at third. Torreyes. And you'll get, of course, Aaron Nola tonight for their game in Cincinnati. Herrera in center. Segura at second. Hoskins at first. Realmuto catching, Miller in right, McCutchen in left, Bohm at third, Torreyes. There you go. That's your lineup for tonight's game. Frank Klose's Phillies mailbag was active this week, and he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Thanks, Frank.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, Frank Klose, of course, you can always ask Frank a question in the mailbag. Just go to @FrankKlose on Twitter and shoot him a tweet, and if he picks your question, you can hear your question being discussed right here on the Sports Bash.